In July 1978, 17-year-old Anni Margaret Tominac and 18-year-old Joy Donna May Hodgins left their Mayfield home telling their housemates they were headed to the Ambassador nightclub in Newcastle. They would never see them again. That was 46 years ago. The exact date of their disappearance is unclear, as various reports give various dates in July 1978, such as the 1st, 7th, 10th and 17th. I suspect part of the confusion is that Anni left her family home and moved with Joy and her housemates, possibly about 10 days before their disappearance. My best guess is that Anni left her family home on the 7th of July and they both disappeared on the 17th of July 1978. Now, I have divided the case of their disappearance into two parts, where I will be covering such things as 1. Why their disappearance became relevant 20 years later, which also led to the two cases being finally linked. 2. The events in each of their lives leading up to their disappearance. 3. The effects of the girls' disappearance had on their family and friends, as well as the family and friends' views on the police interest in 1978, or possibly lack of interest, and then the police interest again in 1998. 4. A suspicious letter that was sent by Joy to her housemates when she disappeared. 5. Similarities with the disappearance of two girls in Wollongong 1 year later in 1979. 6. The 1998 police's solution to Anni's disappearance and the problems I see with that answer, as well as questions that creates which are left unanswered. And finally, I'll talk about the mention of Anni and Joy's disappearance in the New South Wales Parliament last year, being 2023. So to begin with, Anni and Joy were the first of 6 girls aged from 14 to 20 years old to mysteriously disappear over a 16-month period from the Newcastle and Lake Macquarie area. However, it seems the disappearance of Anni and Joy attracted little, if any, media attention at the time. It wasn't until 20 years later that reports of their disappearance began to make headlines. Whilst reports were made to police in 1978, until 1998 it seems they didn't even know Anni and Joy knew each other, let alone that they were together when they disappeared. But more on that later. The story of their disappearance making headlines in 1998 begins with the discovery of a human jawbone on Stockton Beach. This was reported in the Newcastle Herald on March 20 that year. And it says, bones may be linked to murder. Bones found by a fisherman south of Stockton Beach are undergoing DNA testing as part of the reinvestigation into the Hunters' unsolved murders. The remains, a lower jaw complete with 4 teeth, were discovered about 5 kilometres from where the body of murdered barmaid Debbie Ray Pritchard was found. Now, Debbie Ray Pritchard was 24 when she disappeared in 1982, and her remains were found at Fullerton Cove 10 years later in 1992. An inquest in 2003 determined that she was most likely murdered by Maurice Marsland, and he was actually murdered himself in Goulburn Jail in 1996. So I'll continue. Stockton fisherman Mr. Leo Mackay told the Newcastle Herald last night he came across the bones a week ago while fishing 1.5 kilometres south of Stockton Beach. It was lying on the sand on the water's edge, Mr. Mackay said. At first I didn't know whether it was genuine or not. Apparently it is human. It was a bit of a shock. The teeth were in good condition. Mr. Mackay said he had spent the afternoon fishing last Friday and was walking back along the beach when he made the gruesome discovery. I was looking at the holes along the beach, and there it was, lying on the sand, just at the water's edge, Mr. Mackay said. Police recovered the remains, and they were sent to Sydney for DNA testing. The results are expected next week. So we move on towards the end of the article, and it carries on. Specialist detectives from Sydney have reopened the cases of Robin Hickey, Amanda Robinson, Amanda Zollis, and Leanne Goodall. Now, they were the 4 other girls of the 6 that disappeared, and that was from December 1978 to October 1979. And it says, and the file of Ms. Pritchard is being examined. The Age had this to add the next day. The jawbone found last Friday is believed to belong to a woman aged between 16 and 20. So you can see why they are interested in those particular girls. So I assume the police would have been looking at other unsolved disappearances of other girls that were in this age group. And this led to Anni Tominac. Tominac, I should say. It's just the spellings in some of the articles vary, but her name's actually Tominac. And the Daily Telegraph reported on March 30, 1998, Anni Tominac, and as I said, it should be Tominac, who has not been seen for almost 2 decades, has been added to a list of missing persons under investigation since the bone was found on March 13. 5 of the missing persons, Gordana Katevsky, 16, Robin Hickey, 18, Amanda Robinson, 14, Amanda Zollis, 16, and Graham Monk, 22, have been ruled out by police as having any connection to the jawbone. But police have not eliminated Ms. Tominac or Leanne Goodall. The last time the Tominac family saw their daughter was on July 17, 1978. And as I said before, the dates vary from report to report. So it says they, meaning the police, assumed the then 17-year-old from Adamstown Heights in Newcastle had run away from home. Now, there's a few things I want to comment on here. Most reports say she was 17, but she may have only been 16 because there is one report that says she was actually born in December 1961. So if that's true, that would mean she would have turned 17 in December 1978. Now, when she left home, her parents were actually living at New Lambton, but in 1998, when they were interviewed by this reporter, I assume, they were actually living in Adamstown Heights, so there's a little confusion there. The article then continues, when police rang her family on Friday, which would have been the 27th of March 1998, at 1:15 p.m, it was the first time in 19 years interest had been shown in her disappearance. Ms. Tominac's mother, Elizabeth, is adamant her daughter is not dead. When police rang to say the Jawbone may be my daughter's, I said, no way. My daughter is alive, Mrs. Tominac said. She said the renewed attention to her daughter has brought back painful memories. More than anything, I would like to get in touch with her. I just hope she may have a family and is doing well, Mrs. Tominac said. Now, a couple of days before this, the Newcastle Herald reported on the 28th of March 1998 the following. New name on list of suspected murders. Now I'll skip the first bit because it's kind of just repeating what was in the other article. Anni's family said yesterday when their daughter went missing in 1978, she was treated as a runaway. Now, after 19 years, police have reopened her file. The last time I talked to police was 19 years ago, and now today they turn up and tell me her jawbone might have been found, Anni's mother, Elizabeth, said from her Adamstown Heights home. I always hope and I always pray that she is alive, but now I don't know if she is dead or not. The last time Mrs. Tominac saw her daughter was on July 17, 1978. Now, as I said before, the dates are all mixed up. I'm assuming she actually disappeared on July 17th, and it was probably before that she was last seen by her mother. Mrs. Tominac said her 17-year-old daughter was not happy at home and packed up her clothes and some photographs and ran away. Now, I don't like it being said she ran away because I don't think it really fits what's generally thought as running away, as it implies, in a way, she left without telling anyone and they knew nothing about what happened. But other information suggests it was more that she just left home and her parents didn't like it. So in effect, it was she left home without their permission. So it's not quite how I would think it was runaway. But anyway, so it says, concerned for her safety, her parents reported her missing to Adamstown Police 3 weeks later. Now, I'll cover this in a bit more detail as to why they didn't report it until 3 weeks later, which will be clearer in a future article I read here. Then says, in a newspaper article from 1979, Anni's photo and details were featured alongside 4 other missing women: Amanda Robinson, Amanda Zollis, Leanne Goodall and Robin Hickey, with the headline, "Renewed Search for Lost Girls." The article appealed for information about the missing women. Now, I did try and find that article, but I think part of the difficulty there was it doesn't say which newspaper it actually appeared in. And looking at the Newcastle Herald, I'm very confident it wasn't in that paper. However, I did find another article in the Newcastle Herald that's from November 1980, which does mention her and the other girls, but I'll discuss that more and that specific article in part 2 of the videos I'm making on this. It then says Anni was eventually tracked down by police in 1979, but told them, that's the police, she was now 18 and did not want her family to know where she was living. Now, assuming it's correct that Anni was born in December 1961, then she would have only been 17 when they found her. So, anyway, I'll continue. Anni reassured police she would telephone her mother to tell her she was all right. She never rang. Mrs. Tominac said it was the first time in 19 years that interest had been shown in the fate of her daughter. "From the day she left, I don't know where she is or what she is doing," she said. Now, from this last sentence, it does seem to me that the last time her parents saw her was the day she left home and not the day she actually disappeared. So next, I've got information from the Sydney Morning Herald on the same day, the 28th of March 1998. Now it calls Anni Ann, but I'll correct that as I read. Anni Margaret Tominac was 17 when she disappeared from her parents' home in the Newcastle suburb of New Lambton on July 7, 1978. So if Anni's parents last saw her when she moved out on July 7, it would have been 10 days before what seems to be the day she probably disappeared, which was the July 17, 1978. Then says, in Newcastle yesterday, detectives from the 20-officer strike force Fenwick. Now, this strike force was initially set up in 1998 to investigate the disappearances or the unsolved disappearances of 10 people that had occurred since the 1970s in the Newcastle area. So anyway, they knocked on the door of Anni's mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Tominac, now living in Adamstown Heights. They said her daughter's silence for so long required them to establish whether she was alive or dead. Then a bit later it says, detectives are trying to find the officer who informed the Tominacs in early 1979, 8 months after she disappeared, that police had found Anni. Now, I'm unaware if they ever did find the officer who advised the Tominacs that Anni had been found, but the article adds, by then she had turned 18 and because she was an adult, police could not tell her parents her whereabouts. Now, this raises a question whether police actually confirmed Anni's age or just took her word for it. Because, as I said, if she was born in December 1961, then she would have only just turned 17, because 8 months later would have been March 1979. Now, I can understand why her mother was upset and confused when 19 years before they had told her Anni was found and safe and alive, but not wanting to have any contact with her family. Then, this 19 years later, with no further contact from Anni or even the police suddenly turn up saying they think Anni is dead and a jawbone they found might have been hers. It's like, before that, Anni's mother probably had some form of closure, even if it was reluctant acceptance, but this happening would have reopened all those old wounds, wondering if she's alive or dead, and yeah. But anyway, before I go on, you might be interested to know what the outcome was with that jawbone. So the Daily Telegraph reported on April 10, 1998, so a bit over a week or so later. In other developments, preliminary DNA tests conducted on a human jawbone found on Stockton Beach on March 13 is thought to be that of an Asian man aged between 25 and 30. Police are investigating the possibility a sailor may have fallen from an Asian cargo ship visiting Newcastle port. The Newcastle Herald on August 31, 2002, so that's about four and a bit years later, was able to add to this, and it said the jawbone was identified as belonging to a Mongolian man aged in his 40s. So the final identification of the jawbone was a bit different from what they initially thought, but I guess in their defence, it's probably difficult to make an accurate determination of age and gender just based on a jawbone with a few teeth. And I may be wrong, but they might have also been assuming that the jawbone came from someone of European descent. So looking at the physiology, it's probably a little different. Anyway, moving on March 28, 1998 as well, while discussing Anni, the Daily Telegraph introduced the possibility she might have been with another girl when she disappeared. The article states, police yesterday re-interviewed the parents of the 17-year-old who was reported missing on July 1, 1978, so another date to confuse us, and said her unsolved case had been reopened. Now, from what's been said, I think it's probably more accurate to say that they reopened the solved and closed case from 19 years ago, back in March 1979. So they claimed they'd solved it and closed it then, and now they're reopening it. But anyway, police believe her disappearance may be connected to the cases of 11 others who have vanished in the Newcastle area since 1975. The teenager who lived with two other girls in a Mayfield flat, now I think the numbers who she was living with are a little wrong there, and it was also more likely a house. Went on a trip with a female friend and was never seen again. Missing persons files do not name who the other girl was or whether she too has been listed as missing. So the other girl, as we would now know, is clearly Joy Hodgins, but it seems obvious that the media and police had not made that connection at that time. I dare say the strike force officers had found a report on Anni's disappearance and may have found it unusual she was with another girl. So one reason they probably contacted Anni's parents was to determine if they'd had any contact with Anni since 1979 and who the other girl might be, because one or both of them may need to be considered as a possible link to the jawbone that had been found. Now, I'll move on to Joy Hodgins. Her disappearance first appeared in the Newcastle Herald a few days later on April 2, 1998. The connection with Anni's disappearance still hadn't been made at that stage, it seems. Mystery of missing girl back in light. A little girl who needed love. I loved her so much. I wish I knew what happened to her. I think about her so much and care deeply. Those were the last words penned by Ella Anderson 2 years after her adopted granddaughter, Joy Hodgins, disappeared without a trace in July 1978. Mrs. Anderson died before she could find the answer to her question. An adopted child, orphaned for the second time as a teenager. Now, I don't know if she was orphaned twice, because it was quite common back then, particularly for young unwed mothers up to the 1970s, to give up their babies for adoption. So, yeah, the reporter might be making an assumption, or perhaps it's true, I don't know. Anyway, it says Joy Hodgins' mysterious disappearance was never solved. Vanishing after a night out in Newcastle, the 18-year-old never returned to the flat, I think it's a house, she shared with a friend and her dog. 20 years later, her mystery has come back to light. With it comes the tragic story of a woman who had no parents to continue the search for her. Her mother, Claire Hodgins, now this would be her adoptive mother, died 4 months before she disappeared. Until 3 weeks ago, Joy Hodgins' case had long since closed, her file believed lost. But after the discovery of a human jawbone on Stockton Beach, her cousin, Ms. Leslie Hunt, contacted Newcastle Police, wondering if the jawbone could be that of her missing cousin. Ms. Hunt was 26 when her cousin went missing. Now 46, she said she could not let the mystery remain forgotten. She went out that night and obviously she met with foul play, Ms. Hunt said. It used to annoy me that no one cared. I used to ask questions and there was never anything concrete. I just think it was so tragic because she was an orphan and no one did anything about it. Saddened that nothing was said of her cousin when the files of missing women, Gordana Katevsky, Leanne Goodall, Amanda Zolis, Amanda Robinson and Robin Hickey were reopened, Ms. Hunt said she was now hopeful that something would be done. She said that when Ms. Hodgins' adoptive brother Anthony sought out her file in 1990, he was told that there was no record of her. They didn't have anything, she said. They don't even have a file on her. Police would not comment yesterday, but other relatives of the missing woman have confirmed her case was being examined by detectives as part of Strike Force Fenwick, which is investigating the disappearances of the young women. Ms. Hodgins was never forgotten by her grandmother, who died on Christmas Day in 1985. It always worried her, a relative said yesterday. She always thought she would walk through the gate and see her again. The next day, the Newcastle Herald finally reported the connection between Anni and Joy had been discovered. And it says victims were girlfriends. Two Newcastle teenagers, missing for almost 20 years, partied together at a Newcastle club the night they disappeared. The now defunct Ambassador nightclub in Hunter Street has become the focus of a major police investigation, and this was due to others who had disappeared having connections with the Ambassador. The new twist in the case of the Hunter's missing people was revealed on Wednesday night, which would have been the 1st of April, when a friend of one of the women made a statement to detectives. The friend confirmed that Joy Hodgins, 18, and Anni Tominac, 17, were together the night they disappeared on July 17, 1978. A bit further it says, Ms. Hodgins and Ms. Tominac were last seen by friends at Ms. Hodgins' home in Margaret Street, Mayfield, before heading to the Ambassador. Ms. Tominac is understood to have run away from home that month and was staying with her 18-year-old friend. Now, as I said, run away, I think, is a bit of an exaggeration. It was more she just left home and her parents didn't give her permission. And back then, it was not uncommon for teenagers to leave home in their, late teens. I also noted that Anni's family had, up until recently, before then, actually lived in Mayfield and went to New Lambton. And I get that from the 1977 electoral roll showing her parents living in Mayfield. So maybe Anni didn't regard New Lambton as a home, felt uncomfortable, thought she was old enough to move out anyway, and went back to Mayfield. And Margaret Street, as it turns out, was only a few hundred metres away from both of the previous homes of Anni and Joy. But it continues. Elizabeth Tominac, Anni's mother, recalls going to the Mayfield house after her daughter's disappearance. I met somebody there and she told me that they went to a dance and they didn't come back the next day, Mrs. Tominac told the Herald yesterday. All this information was supplied to police 20 years ago, she said. Yesterday, Ms. Hodgins' 35-year-old brother told of the tragedy surrounding his adoptive sister's disappearance. Just months earlier, her mother Claire had died of cancer, so that's her adoptive mother, and Ms. Hodgins had moved out of the family home into a flat in Hunter Street with some friends. She later moved into the Mayfield house. So it does say it's a house. It's not a flat at Mayfield, where she lived until her disappearance. It was not until 3 days after her disappearance that her brother was told she had not returned from the night out. It was out of character, he said. She just went out that night with a girlfriend with the clothes she had on, and she never came back. I think she might have been abducted, and apparently this other girl. She was with her. She had all her clothes and a lot of her furniture and belongings in the house. In his statement to the investigating police this week, Mr. Hodgins said, "I believe that something may have happened to her that night and she may be dead. Although I certainly hold out hope that she is still alive." 14 at the time of her disappearance, there was little he could do to help investigations. So that's the brother being 14. Had his mother been alive, he believes more would have been done to find his sister. In 1990, Mr. Hodgins made 2 requests of his sister through the New South Wales Police Missing Persons Unit. Her records were not found. It was a phone call from his cousin Leslie Hunt 3 weeks ago that brought his sister into the investigations. So from that, it seems Strikeforce Fenwick was aware of Joy Hodgins' disappearance 2 weeks before they visited Anni's parents, but at that time hadn't confirmed the connection between the two. Possibly they may have suspected, but yeah, anyway. It continues. "I cried a lot since then," Mr. Hodgins said yesterday. "You get your quiet moments when your thoughts wander and you think about these things. It's good to see they are taking an interest now." Now, I don't know the circumstances of Joy's adoption, but given the connection that the adoptive family felt, I would suspect she was most likely adopted as a baby or at least a very small child, as they seem to have a strong connection to her. It also appears she didn't plan to disappear because she left all her things behind and took nothing with her, not even a dog. But to continue, on April 4, 1998, the Sydney Morning Herald reported, "The Bass was the place for 18-year-old Joy Hodgins and her friend Anni Tominac, 17, on the night of Monday, July 17, 1978. Hodgins, an adopted child orphaned as a teenager, was living in a small unit, that should be house, at Mayfield. Tominac had moved into the flat house 10 days earlier after moving out of her parents' home against their wishes. Tominac's parents did not report their daughter missing until 3 weeks after she had left home, when some former school friends told them they hadn't seen her. So just do some quick maths here. It suggests that it was about 10 days after she disappeared that they would have reported that to police. And it wasn't that they were reporting her as a runaway. They were reporting her due to her friends raising concerns with them that she seemed to have totally disappeared, whereas before they had assumed she was still around. And so, given the time that had passed since she disappeared, it would have kind of made the trail cold to follow, particularly if police didn't take it seriously. But anyway, the local police found that she had been living in Mayfield, but for some unexplained reason, they recorded her as having been found safe. Now, if that was at the time, yes, it does seem that around the time she disappeared, that does seem a bit odd, but if they were referring to when it was said she was found 8 months later, then that would not have been the reason that she was living at Mayfield. They reported her safe. But I'll get onto that when I do the part 2 video of their disappearance. It then says, in view of her age, the police would have been unable to force her to move back home or even tell her parents her address. But anyway, who actually reported Joy's disappearance, and what was the police response? That question will also be answered in the second of these 2 videos about the disappearance of Anni Tominac and Joy Hodgins. I'll also discuss the police response in 1978 to their disappearances, a similar disappearance of 2 girls that occurred in Wollongong the following year in July 1979, the police solution in 1998 to Anni's disappearance, and my thoughts on the problems with the answer that they give. And I'll also talk about Anni and Joy's disappearance being mentioned in New South Wales Parliament last year as part of the disappearances of a number of people. And yeah, so that was only last year in 2023. So if you'd like to be notified when I do upload that video, or if you'd like to see other videos I upload, then please subscribe and click on the bell to be notified when that occurs. I hope you found this video informative and interesting, and will want to watch my future videos. And if you'd like to support me to make more videos, you can do so at Patreon. I'm David A. Elliott. Have a good one and see you around like a risol.